Welcome to Anthropology and Symbols, and this week's lecture, which is entitled Symbolizing the Group. In this picture on the slide you can see a couple of dogs sitting on the American flag, and they've got American flags tied around their necks as kind of neckerchiefs, I guess you call it. And this image appeared on the internet about a month ago when the actress pictured here posted this picture on the internet. Now the picture caused a lot of a storm on the internet because a lot of people found it very offensive. So the actress pictured apologized and affirmed her commitment to the American values. So the question I want to ask you is, for who is this kind of for whom is the flag important, and why is it important for them? And if it's not the flag, why is the cross important to other people, and why would they be unhappy to see the cross destroyed, or why would some Australians be unhappy to see the Australian flag burned? I don't know what answer you've got. Durkheim's got a pretty good answer, I think, and that's what we're going to look at today. And what we're looking at particularly is the functional approach. Durkheim, who I mentioned, is the father, if you like, of the functional approach in sociology and anthropology. And he argued that sacred symbols get people together and create a mood and enable us to worship our own society or our own group. And this led to the contentious and exciting and problematic finding that when we worship God, we worship our own community. So how are we going to get to this stage? Well, we will firstly look at functionalism itself more generally, and then at Durkheim the man and his approach to religion. In order to make his case, he looks at clan and totem in Aboriginal Australian societies. So we'll consider that before looking at his general findings about symbol and society. I'll then present some reflections on those symbols and society ideas. Then I'll do a bit of an application in part 7, which is how symbols can be approached to understand the AFL using Durkheim's approach. The AFL is Australian football, by the way. I'll then summarise, discuss and conclude the lecture. So we know this unit is about what anthropological theories concerning symbols can tell us about humanity. And in this lecture particularly what we're going to look at is what functional theories, or functionalism, in relation to symbols can tell us about human life. So when we apply functionalism to the study of symbols, what does it tell us about being human? So functionalism has a couple of general principles. The first is that any cultural phenomenon, such as the worship of a symbol or a communal feast, will be tied to all other aspects in society. So this is point 2 here. So if you looked at a communal feast, you would look at the politics. Excuse me, who gets the best piece of meat or whatever. How does it relate to economy? Who gave and who gets to consume? How does it relate to the environment? What time of the year does it take part? Is it related to this passing of the seasons? Does it create extra protein and carbohydrates for the diet? Is it associated with curing people, etc., etc.? So when you try and understand one thing in society, you have to connect it to the whole picture of society. And the general picture is that once you do that, you'll be able to see how each phenomenon helps the group or the individual survive. The principle here is quite simple, that if most or a majority of the phenomena in a society, the ritual meals, the symbols and stuff, did not help the group or the individual to survive, the society would cease to exist, it would die out. So the general principle is that all the phenomena must in sum help the survival of the community and its people. Having said that, those ideas are not necessarily in the forefront of functionalism. They're just sort of in the background quite often, and it's certainly the case with the great thinkers of functionalism, starting off with Durkheim and his division of labour in society, who influenced thinkers such as Malinowski, who's the father of modern anthropology because he did fieldwork amongst the Trobe Islanders, so the first person to do participant observation or ethnographic research as we know it, was influenced by Durkheim. So was another famous anthropologist, Radcliffe Brown, who did work in the Andaman Islands on the southeast of India or northwest of Indonesia. So in particular, we're going to look at this sort of forefather of functionalism, Emile Durkheim. His Division of Labour and Society is a classic work, published in 1893. Suicide is another fantastic, mind-blowingly good book, I've got to say, of 1897. He worked on a journal called Annales Sociologiques from 1898. And he also worked with another famous thinker called Mauss, who was his nephew on that journal. And particularly what we're interested today is his publication, Elementary Forms of Religious Life, which we're going to deal with for the remainder of this lecture. And in it, he asks, what is religion about? Why do we have religion? What makes it important? Why are humans religious? And I should say, if you're thinking, oh, I'm an atheist, I don't believe in God or anything like that, I don't believe in spirit, you might still, by an anthropological understanding, be religious. What we're concerned with is not so much the spiritual stuff as that which is sacred. So if you have things that are sacred, really important to you, if you have something like an American flag you wouldn't like to see burnt, things you wouldn't like to see destroyed, that would probably indicate you are religious. And you'd probably be religious in the most basic sense. As humans, the story goes, we get our name from humus, meaning earth, like we were the species, and the only species that we know that buries their dead or does some sorts of ritual for their dead. And in as much as if for example, someone in your family dies, you don't chuck them in the rubbish bin or just treat them like any old trash. At least at the very basic level, you're religious if you have any kind of funeral or service for a dead person. So that is an indication that you might be religious in an anthropological understanding. To put another way, you don't need to believe in spirits or God to be religious, as far as Durkheim and the anthropologists who followed him are concerned. The first thing Durkheim says is that religion is about beliefs and actions which are directed towards the sacred and not the profane. So in one image here you have people, the profane just means the mundane, the everyday. Here you have a bunch of people standing around waiting for a bus. We will call this profane. It's just the average mundane daily stuff. It doesn't have any significant or particular meaning in their lives. Catching the bus is merely a way home. If you look at this picture, you have a group of Jewish men celebrating their Torah, taking it out, and the Torah is their holy scroll. Basically, the first part of the Bible, if you're a Christian, the first part of the Bible is written inside a scroll which is covered by this scroll cover. And what they're doing there is actions directed towards the sacred, because that is something, according to Durkheim, that is set apart from the everyday and mundane. Something very special and deeply meaningful, to put it another way. And that is what defines religions, beliefs and actions which are directed towards the sacred and not the profane, which makes this picture depicting something religious and this picture depicting something not religious. Now, what is quite interesting, particularly for Westerners who have been, who have grown up with the secularization, the push to make things, to label certain beliefs as religious and separate them out from public life. People like me who have been brought up in that secular tradition seem to think about religious things as being something out there, like the hereafter, about something greater and more meaningful than daily existence. But what Durkheim argues is that ultimately this sacred stuff is not really about something out there, like in this picture depicting something eternal and beautiful, but actually more about our society. In other words, religion is about us as much as what is up above us. and it's about the community, a community of believers, which we'll get onto in a second, rather than the individual. And it's about action just as much as it is about thought, or to put it another way, it's about religion just as much as it is about belief. So for Durkheim, religion is social. It is a unified system of beliefs and practices relative to sacred beliefs, which unite into one single moral community with all those who adhere to them. So in this picture you have an image of thousands of Muslims who are united into a single moral community, which Muslims call the Ummah, the believers, the community of believers, and it's relative to a sacred thing, the Kaaba, the black box, if you like, in Mecca. And so it's their systems and beliefs in relation to this black box and the larger practices and beliefs of Islam, which connect them into a single moral community, the Ummah as they call it. So Durkheim's point is that religion is social and it unites us. And in order to make this case, Durkheim looks at Australian tribes. There's the tribes of Australian Aboriginal people. He used data from early anthropologists, well, actually wouldn't even call them anthropologists, proto-anthropologists, I guess, who did research in the late 1800s in the desert parts of Australia. And they described how the Australian tribes were divided into clans, and each clan had its own totem. So here we have a map of, approximate map of Aboriginal groups in Australia. You can see famous groups that actually Spencer and Gillenhoe just mentioned: Warlpiri, Arrernte, Bidunjajara. Where I'm writing from now is Wurundjeri, which is down here, which is part of the Kulin Nations. I come from an area which is Noongar, which is in southwest Australia. So all these areas more or less, you wouldn't really call them strict tribal boundaries or anything, but it gives you a kind of idea of where different groups in Australia reside. And what we're going to be looking at today is the Arrabana, who come from here, which is an area in northeastern South Australia, around in a place called Lake Eyre, if you want to Google map it. So, and here's a picture of an Arrabana man, and you might notice scarification, scars on his skin. That's the first thing that might strike you, which is a part of ritual life for the Arrabana. So let's look at Arrabana organisation. Basically, everybody in Arrabana society belonged to one of two, you could call them phatries, which is P-H-A-T-R-I-E-S, but the more common name now, if the society is divided into two, there's Maturi and Kirarawa. So two moieties, two halves, if you like, to society. Now this is probably pretty difficult to understand, but maybe if you've ever been to a school carnival, maybe your school divided you into three groups, and my primary school was maroon, gold, and white. There were three groups, so you're sort of arbitrarily divided into one of them. If that helps you, maybe you could understand it like that, that there's two moieties. There's Maturi and Kirarawa. Now within those moieties you have different groups. You've got wild duck, cicada, dingo, emu, wild turkey, black swan, cloud, carpet snake, lace lizard, pelican, water hen, and crow, and other ones I should mention. So, you know, anybody you meet in this society would identify with a moiety like Maturi, and also their own clan or totem, which might be dingo, which is a kind of native dog in Australia. So this is not necessarily just because you're both your parents. It's not the case that both your parents are black swan and then you were born black swan. Typically in clan systems, I don't know exactly how it works amongst the Arabana, if you're from one moiety, you have to marry from another moiety. So if you're Cicada, you have to marry somebody from Kirarawa. And within Kirarawa, there might be better people for you to marry, like lace lizard, and worse people like water hen. But what you definitely couldn't marry, for example, might be somebody from your own moiety, or even worse, might be your own clan. There are various rules around clans and totems. I don't know what it is in Arabana, but the point is that it's not just something you necessarily inherit from your parents, nor do you necessarily marry someone from the same moiety or clan. Often you all belong to different husband, wife, and children might belong to different clans. So what is a clan? A clan is a group of people related by having the same name. So if you go to one of these tribes, somebody might identify, oh, I'm Honey Ant, and that lady over there, she's Honey Ant too. So it's a name, Honey Ant, just like when I was at primary school, somebody would say, okay, at the school carnival day, what are you? I'd say I'm Maroon, which means I belong to the Maroon, team. Now, for Maroon, at my primary school, we only had a colour, but for the Honey Ant, they also have a totem, which I've written carpet snake here. It should say Honey Ant, actually, which is the Honey Ant totem. So here we have the Honey Ant totem. And this is actually not from the Arabana, but from the Arrernte tribe, who are to the north of the Arabana. And you can see this is a churinga, which is what we'd call in English a bull roarer. And Durkheim writes about churinga a lot, so it's worth mentioning. A churinga is a bull roarer, which is basically an implement which could be made of wood or something else. This one's made out of wood. You tie it to a string, and you swing the string around your head. Swing the string around your head, and of course, if the string's long enough, the implement, in this case the wooden churinga, goes so fast it starts to whistle in the wind and then starts to make a mighty noise. So for the Arrernte tribe, they would have a churinga, which has this Honey Ant emblem on it, and which is associated with the tribe. So for me, being Maroon, it was just a colour, the colour Maroon. That was my team. So you have a group of people with a name. They have a totem. In this case, I wrote carpet snake here, but it should be Honey Ant. And they all associate with the Honey Ant. They also associate with symbols of the Honey Ant, such as you can find on this churinga, on this bull roarer. So typically, when you have a totem, it relates, not all the time, but it often relates, in the case of Aboriginal Australian culture, to a superhuman ancestor. So the basic idea is that, and I'm not an expert on this, so apologies, but in the most basic sense, as Durkheim explains it anyway, long ago, at the start of history, the world was all flat, and our ancestors, who were mighty superhumans, roamed around the world and formed the landscape. And they did this during the time called the churinga, or the dreaming. And then our ancestor, if it was turned into an animal or a plant or the wind or whatever it might be. So the idea is that the Honey Ant, if you belong to the Honey Ant clan, you'd tell, well, our ancestor, who's the Honey Ant, was a man. And originally the Honey Ant was a man or a woman, and this Honey Ant roamed the flat earth and started making shapes in the ancestor and followed a path, which is called a songline, across the country. And then at some point the Honey Ant turned into an ant that we can see now, and you can actually eat these honey ants. You hold on to the head and suck out the belly. So the superhuman ancestor you can find in every ant, a bit of that sort of supernatural power, if you like, resides in every honey ant you see. If you come to Australia and you go to the middle of Australia, to Arrernte country, which is just north of what's called Ayers Rock, now called Uluru, you can find honey ants there, and they have part of the honey ant spirit in them. As do you, if you're a member of the honey ant clan. So the spirit of this honey ant ancestor who turned into a honey ant also resides in you, a person who's a member of the honey ant clan. And you might have sort of responsibilities to multiply, which means to make sure that the honey ants continue. I've never heard of it in relation to honey ants, but it might be in kangaroos, for example. If you belong to the kangaroo clan, which we eat, we need to make sure that the kangaroos keep on coming. So I'm a kangaroo too, and I've got to make sure that the kangaroos keep living. Sometimes if you're not allowed to actually eat your own clan, so if you're, I'm not sure about the exact case, again this is not my area of anthropology, but if you are, for example, a kangaroo clan member, you have a food taboo, you can't eat kangaroos. I'm not sure if that's always the case, I just heard of it in some cases. Okay, so honey ant, it's a symbol on a churinga and painted on a wall in the desert. It's also an insect that actually lives out there in the bush. It's also a superhuman ancestor. It's also me, because I'm part of the honey ant clan. It's in the earth where the honey ant form part of the landscape. There's a bit of him or her in there too. And I'm responsible also for honey ants. The perpetuation of the insect, making sure it continues to survive and we can continue, or others can continue to eat it. So this quote comes from Spencer and Gillen, who Durkheim draws on. In the Alteringa, the dreaming, lived ancestors who, in the native mind, are so intimately associated with the animals or plants, the name of which they bear, that an Alteringa man, say of the kangaroo totem, may sometimes be spoken of as a man kangaroo or as a kangaroo man. The identity of the human individual is often sunk in that of the animal or plant from which he is supposed to have originated. So kangaroo man identifies as a kangaroo. It is useless to try and get back further than the Alteringa. The history of the tribe as known to the natives commences then. So when we say totem, like honey ant, what do we mean? Well, first of all, it's a symbol. It's a symbol, like, for example, as drawn on this, on this churinga. It's a symbol. And so a totem is, before anything else, according to Durkheim, a symbol. But what lies behind it and is most important for Durkheim is what he calls the totemic principle, which is found in the image or the emblem, the painting of the honey ant, in the animal itself, the insect, the honey ant insect out there, and people, the men or women you meet who say that they are part of the honey ant clan, or might even say, I am honey ant. This is, he says, this totemic principle, which is found in all three things, is an anonymous and impersonal force. Totemism is a religion not so much of such and such animals or men or images, but of an anonymous and impersonal force. The force is found in images, animals, and people of the totem. So right now we have a classic kind of anthropological and particularly functionalist move. The Arabana person or the Arunta person who speaks to Spencer and Gillen says, I am honey ant and honey ant is out there. But Durkheim turns around and says, aha, I think what they're really saying is that there's a totemic principle which is found in images, animals and people. And it's not just the natives, as he would have called them, of Australia, but also amongst Catholics or Jews or Muslims as well. But we'll get to that later. So there's an idea that there's a totemic principle which is found in the images, animals and people of the totem. So you have the people of the clan. These people identify with their own clan. I don't know which clan it is. Let's say, just for the sake of it, and I'm sorry to any Indigenous people if I get this wrong, please correct me, but let's say these people are identifying with the honey ant ancestor. The honey ant taught them how to dance and how to behave and set down the laws for them. So there's the people who belong to the honey ant clan. So you have the people of the clan who identify with a symbol. So this is kangaroo. We'll change it to kangaroo. People of the kangaroo clan who identify with a symbol of a kangaroo, something drawn on a wall or on a churinga or something, and also with the animal outside in the world. And the idea here is that as far as these people understand it, this totemic principle is in them, it's in these images, and it's in the animals themselves. Now here it gets a bit complicated or amazing. If these men, when they worship the symbol, when they dance the kangaroo dance, are worshipping the kangaroo, which is out there, an animal out there, but which is in them, what they are actually doing, and here again, this is the functionalist talking, Durkheim the functionalist talking, what they are actually doing is worshipping themselves. And he doesn't mean that in an egotistical sense, like we would say when I was a boy in Australia, oh, you love yourself, as a kind of put down, as a way of making somebody feel bad, but rather the structure of society. In other words, these people are worshipping the structure of their society. That for them, without realizing it, they're making the structure of their society sacred, which helps preserve society. And for Durkheim, you need society to survive. Man is a social animal. He didn't say it, but that's what he was thinking. And that without society, we don't survive. So we must preserve society, and to preserve it, we must honour it and keep it sacred. So the clan is a group of people called kangaroo. And this is the same, this is equated in their mind with the totem, which is both an emblem, an image of a kangaroo, the actual animal out there that hops around in the Australian bush, and the people. So the kangaroo is a group of people with the totemic principle, let's say a certain kangaroo-ness, which resides partly in them, a bit more in the kangaroos hopping around outside there, and even more in the emblem, the image or the symbol of the kangaroo. And you can see symbols creeping back in here, and why we discuss Durkheim when we're talking about symbols, because this kangaroo-ness lives in the symbol. And if you're getting a bit confused here, think about Americanness residing in the American flag. So remember, the kangaroo is also the Dreamtime ancestor. The kangaroo is the Dreamtime ancestor, which transforms, and his spirit or power is transformed into the land around you, into the people themselves, into the kangaroos who hop around, the animals, the marsupials that hop around, and into the images which are etched on walls and on bull roarers. It's all around, and behind it all is this kangaroo-ness, this totemic principle, which lives in all those things. So you have a clan, a group of people called kangaroo. They have a totem, which is an emblem or an animal or the kangaroo people. And this is the same thing as the totemic principle or God. So the kangaroo clan is the same thing as the kangaroo totem, which is the same thing as the totemic principle. Or, if you like, in American society has a totem, which is the American flag, and its God is like American values. Or Christians have a cross which is equated with Jesus Christ the Saviour and with God. So I'm moving now to Christianity. If Christians are equated with the cross, which is equated with God, then Christians are associated with God and God with Christians. And when Christians worship God, they are worshipping themselves. Or when Jews worship God, they're worshipping themselves. And that kind of makes sense, right? What's the difference between a Jew and a Muslim, for example? A Jew worships from an anthropological perspective, okay, from an outsider's perspective, not from an insider's perspective. From an outsider's perspective, when a Jew worships God, he's worshipping a Jewish God. What's that God of? It's a God of the Jews, which relates back to the Jews themselves. It seems incredibly simple when I put it like that. For another example is when an American worships American values. Of course, what they're worshipping is Americans. So this does work on a very obvious level. The society is actually religion is also about worshipping one's own society, one's own group. So Durkheim goes a bit further. The people of the kangaroo clan, or the Jewish person, think they depend on their totem, the kangaroo, or the god. You've got to keep your god happy, you've got to keep your kangaroo ancestors happy. You feel dependent, if you're a Jew, on the Almighty. Just as if you're a part of the kangaroo clan, you feel dependent on your kangaroo ancestor. That dependence you feel, you kind of misunderstand, because what you really depend on for survival is your own society. So in the same way, so when you worship your totem as a kangaroo ancestor or as the Jewish God, you're essentially worshipping yourself as your group, if you like. So the point here is that religion is society reflected back on itself through symbols. And it's important that we do this. It's important that we worship our own society because we depend on it for survival. We think we depend on God or the kangaroo ancestors, but actually, this is a classic functionalist again, but actually what we really depend on is our own society. So actually the arrows could go both ways on this image. We'll call these men, and again apologies if I've got this wrong, I'm happy to re-record and correct it. These men who belong to the kangaroo clan, representing, worshipping the kangaroo, and particularly the kangaroo emblem or image, which is basically a way of, in the end, worshipping themselves, their own group, their own clan. And it's important they do this because their social structure is what keeps them alive. So I'm going to try and put it another way. In Aboriginal Australian societies that Spencer and Gillen wrote about and that Durkheim picked up on, every clan has a totemic or heroic ancestor or ancestral beings or the first people. Whatever you want to call them, these are the people of the dreaming. These are kind of magnified or superhuman beings. For example, there was the emu ancestor who could change form, and his life, he could change from being a man into an emu, and his life form resides in the rocks and in the trees and the hills of the landscape. And this life force can be renewed and brought about particularly through rituals and ceremonies. So the idea of totemism, of course, is not limited to Aboriginal Australian societies. In fact, it's most famous in relation to the northwest coast of America, around the area of Seattle and over the border into Vancouver in BC. Now, in these totem poles, if you like, contain images of ancestors. I'm not sure which ones are which. I'm assuming this would be the thunderbird up the top here. There might be bear somewhere further down. I'm sorry, I can't identify them. This is not the field I do research in. Be different animals who are actually ancestors of the person or related to the person who erects the totem pole, or commissions or erects the totem pole. Now, you remember last lecture when I was talking about origins and evolution? That was kind of like the first concern in anthropology. The first concern in anthropology was with the origins of human society as we know it. Durkheim continues that concern. So he's a bit of a crossover figure. He's got that origins and evolution understanding, but he's also interested in a new way of looking at human society, and that's not to look at what elements have survived, but what elements keep people alive in different societies. So in other words, he's not interested so much in what old stuff still continues to exist and might not be relevant anymore, but more about, he looks at cultural things like a totem pole or a dance or whatever it might be as something that helps the people of that society continue to live. Now, the whole idea of totemism. Sorry, I haven't got to that. I shouldn't get to the whole idea yet. I've got to actually clarify first that for Durkheim, this totemism, as you can see in Central Australia, is the most primitive religion, and it portrays people as being tied to nature. Of course, if my ancestor was the kangaroo man and I am a kangaroo, not too dissimilar to that marsupial that bounces around out there, then I'm very closely tied to nature. And especially if the life force which is in me, which is in the kangaroo, also is in that rock over there, because the kangaroo ancestor created that rock. You can see a very different kind of relationship to nature than might be felt by Westerners, who might feel very close to nature, very tied and at one with nature, but in very different ways. Okay, so there have been critiques of this idea of totemism, and I can refer you to Morton to look at those critiques. Another critique came from Levi-Strauss, who said that totemism, our understandings of totemism are kind of are misunderstandings. We have made a mistake to use this term. We don't know exactly what we mean about it. Whenever we use the word totemism in different cultures, we're talking about different things. What it does show, though, is that we do tend to use symbols and metaphors in order to understand our lives. So these, so from people like Morton, who's one of my colleagues, or Levi-Strauss, who's now passed away, we get critiques of the idea of totemism as expressed by Levi-Strauss. I should say that when Durkheim is writing in the elementary forms of society, he's actually talking about unity within the clans. When he's talking about the kangaroo or the honey ant, he's just talking about one clan and not the entire society. But firstly, because these clans cut through kin ties. So it's not the case that if I'm honey ant, my parents were honey ant, my dad might be dingo and my mum might be rainbow serpent or rainbow snake, which means that the people who are very close to me also belong to different clans, so that I'm very close also to those other clans as well. So that's one way that it might provide solidarity to support Durkheim's position. The other, just more generally, if people really believe that these structures are tied up with who they are and the entire landscape and the entire world as it is, then of course they'll be more committed to their social structure, which Durkheim thinks we need to be in order to survive. So let's look at an application of this idea. It all sounds a bit exotic and strange, which we know from the principle of reflexivity it shouldn't. So I might reflect on AFL, which is Australian Rules Football, which is a game I played as a boy. Still a big fan. I'm a member of the Richmond Tigers. Go you Tigers! Richmond Tigers Football Club. And to be fair, I've decided to look at other clubs. So again, if you're listening to this overseas, or not even if you're listening to this in New South Wales, AFL is a game of football. It comes from Australia. At the moment, there are different teams who compete in a competition called the AFL, the Australian Football League. So let's consider one of the teams, which is the Melbourne Demons Football Club. Let's consider the supporters and the people associated with the club as a clan. So it's a clan of people. There's the Melbourne Football Club, there's the fans who come along to a couple of games, there are members who go along to all the games, there are players, both past and present, coach and stuff. So that's a clan of people. There's an emblem, which is an image, which can be a flag, or on a mascot. Here it's the Demons, the Melbourne Demons. Here's a 1970s style. Here's a 2000-ish style. But there's also a principle that pictures like this try to encapsulate, a principle of demonness, if you like, which no Melbourne Demons fan would ever admit to. But functionalists don't care about that, because we are not trying to appeal to what makes sense to people. But we go, aha, when you say this, we actually know better. That's what you do if you're a functionalist. So you say, well, what you're actually talking about with the Melbourne Demons is a kind of demonness, or a Melbourneness, if you like, which is a transcendent abstract quality, which makes the group different to other teams, such as the Collingwood Magpies or the Richmond Tigers. And this demonness is immanent. It can be found in the people, the players and the fans. It can be found in the emblem, and it can be found in the actual demon itself, if there was such a demon. And the important point here is, and this can be the case also in different totems, totemic clans that have been written about elsewhere, such as in the northwest coast. It's not that you worship, if you're a Melbourne Demons fan, that you worship or emulate the demons. You rarely say that you possess the demonic qualities if you're a fan. There is a sense when you read the newspapers, they'll talk about demons will fry the eagles, or magpies, if we're talking about another team, the magpies will eat the crows. So magpies, sometimes in newspapers or when you're joking with friends, you like to use these metaphors in a kind of more literal sense, but no one actually believes that there's an actual demon out there that actually has the quality. So the analogy is not perfect, right? But and here, I mean, the point is that you don't need to identify with an actual demon. So one of the presidents of the demons was a Orthodox Jewish guy called Joseph Gutnick. So Orthodox he was that he couldn't go out on the Sabbath on Saturdays to watch his team play. But so he's a man who worships God, not demons, but he identifies with this kind of demonness, if that makes sense. So it's not just animals, of course. You have other teams around the world. You have numbers, like the 49ers. You have letters, like the Oakland A's. You have colours, like the Carlton Blues. You have ethnic groups, like the Cincinnati Braves, Saanich Braves, my favourite hockey team out there. Also, like Brewers, Milwaukee Brewers. What other humans other humans can be ethnic groups, or human groups can be professions. The Gunners, Arsenal Gunners, the Fremantle Dockers, and of course animals, the Geelong Cats, the Richmond Tigers. So there is some analysis into this, why, for example, certain colours or numbers will end up being teams. But from one perspective, for Durkheim, it doesn't matter too much. As long as you have something, some sort of metaphor, like a colour, a number or something to identify with, that's enough to get a sense of group solidarity. So sports teams generally, their totemic animals and symbols are not as sacred are not as sacred, I think, as Aboriginal Australian totems are sacred. But they do, in some sense, need to be sacred for people to unite around them. They do need to respect. If you're a Richmond supporter, you do need to respect the Richmond Tigers flag and so on. And another Richmond Tiger fan would not appreciate it if you went and burnt their flag, and nor would a 49er supporter appreciate that. So football does form a kind of community, especially where I'm talking from right now in Victoria. So you have your football teams. I support the Tigers. My cousin Ruby supports the Dockers. But because even though we support different teams, being actually just supporting a team in the AFL makes us part of a larger kind of community who we kind of understand as, the footy community. Footy is the Australian word for football. On the other hand, the football analogy might not be too bad. Some subsequent anthropologists, and particularly Nick Peterson, a lecturer who's done work on the Warlpiri mob in Central Australia, suggests that the totemism as explained by Durkheim and others is not such a deep spiritual experience for the Arrernte people or the Warlpiri people. That maybe it's more something that's pretty good to think with. It's useful to divide up society according to these lines. I think I misunderstood, if I understood Peterson correctly. Maybe I misunderstood him. So basically, in summary, the question about this totemic principle is the totemic principle is something that's supposed to reside in, for example, the people of the honey ant clan, the insects out there, the emblem of the honey ant ancestor, all around them. Similarly, for the Melbourne Demon supporters, this demonic quality is in the team, it's in the emblem, the symbol of the demon, and it's also now I've forgotten the next point, it's getting late here. So it's in the team, it's in the mascot, and it's in the actual demon itself. And this applies to other societies too. The relationship of Catholics to their God is reminiscent of the way an individual should relate to their society. It's a relationship of dependence and submission. So to put it another way, the way a Catholic thinks they rely on God, Durkheim turns around and says, yeah, but what you're actually expressing is the way you as an individual rely on your society. It's a relationship of dependence. You require a society to survive, and submission. For the most part, you adhere to the rules set by your society. So clans believe that a totemic force unites them, which can be found in the emblems, in the members of the clan, in the ancestors, and so on. And people believe that a special spiritual force unites them. If you're a Christian, it's the cross. You can see it in the symbol, you can see it in yourself, and you can see it in Christ. Maybe to a certain extent, if you're a Jew, you can see it in the Magen David, the Star of David. You see it in the symbol, you see it in yourself, and you see it in God, the Almighty, who you worship, and so on, and so on. So totemic emblems unify people into clans around the totem. Symbols unify people into moral communities around the spiritual and transcendental. So the American flag unifies American citizens around the values of the American dream and American values, which are found in the symbol of the American flag and found in the community itself. So this equals this, equals this, equals this, equals this, which is another way, a roundabout way of saying when we worship God, we are worshipping ourselves as a community. So religion, symbol, and society and all are all connected. Religion and symbol function to provide social solidarity or unity. So when we think we are worshipping a god, our totem, our flag, our ancestor, American values, or whatever it is, we're doing what anthropologists call a manifest function. What we think we're doing is worshipping a god. And if you speak to somebody, they'll give you their emic explanation. Oh, I'm worshipping God here because it's Sunday and I'm in church, or it's Saturday morning, I'm in shul, synagogue, and I'm worshipping God. What Durkheim says is what you're actually doing is getting together and worshipping and forming your social group, whether it's the Catholics, the Jews, or the honey ant clan. And that's the latent clan, that's what latent function, that's what lies below it. That's what you call the etic, or the outsider's explanation. So a lot of functionalism is about this. You look at the explanations people give and you go, yeah, but actually what you're doing is that. I have to say I'm not a functionalist anthropologist, but that's what they used to do. So when we worship the gods or spirits of our ancestors, we're actually worshipping ourselves. So Durkheim, the sociologist who inspired so many anthropologists, was concerned with the origins. He said the original religion was totemism, so that in that way he connects back to the past, the origins and evolution aspect of anthropology, that school of thought which runs from about 1870 to 1914. But when he talks about how religion functions, what it does, how it assists survival, etc., what he's talking about there is the ideas that are going to inspire the next generation of anthropologists, people like Malinowski and Radcliffe Brown. So I can't remember what I called this society. I think it was Symbols and, or I called this lecture. I can't remember what it was called, but it could have been called Symbols and Social Organisation, because the point is that symbols create and solidify social organisation, or symbols as solidarity. As I point out, it provides unity to society. Or it could have been symbolising society, that a symbol like the cross doesn't, according to Durkheim, symbolise God and Jesus Christ, but actually symbolise Christians back to themselves. So symbols, like the totem, like the honey ant, or like the demon, or the Melbourne demons, allows a social group to represent itself back to itself. So a group, which Durkheim sometimes called a moral community, is basically a number of people who hold the same symbols to be sacred or religious. To quote Durkheim, religious interests are merely the symbolic form of social and moral interests. The basic interests for society are social and moral, and they are symbolised in religious symbols. Thank you very much.